What is immortality? Okay, now I don't want to scare you. I mean, this is still a baseball channel. But there's a reason why I ask this question. And yeah, these philosophic thoughts do come to me frequently when I do this research. Well, you see, I'm not normal. You see, I'm not one of those stat-obsessed baseball fans. I do enjoy statistics, just like anybody else with an interest in the sport, but it's not my focus. Nope, the thing that I care the most about is the stories. Some people dream of Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. Well, I dream of guys like Charlie Starr. He's the man who the 1908 Pirates would have started at shortstop if Honus Wagner had actually retired. I dream of guys like Hunky Shaw, who had a total of 1 plate appearance in real life for the same 1908 Pirates. He struck out. I relish in the stories of guys like Harvey Cushman. Cushman was the only bad pitcher on the 1902 Pittsburgh Pirates. You see, the stories are the reason why I play games like APBA, Strat-O-Matic, Diamond Mind, Out of the Park Baseball, and all the rest. It's not the stats, it's the stories. Now, there's not a whole ton of guys like me out there, and so when I discover one, you better bet that I pay attention. Robert J. Levy was like me. Levy spent his life working in television broadcasting. He was also a huge fan of APBA baseball. And his 1934 season is probably the best replay description I've ever read. The thing that makes this replay great is not who won, it's not the individual accomplishments or the stats, how realistic it was, or even the game that he used. The thing that makes it great is the way that Bob wrote about it. Bob wrote about these games and about the players as if he'd actually watched it take place. He didn't just talk about the history using some stats and some cards. He didn't throw in a whole bunch of criticism of the game engine, stuff like that. Now, he took history and he rewrote it, and he created it into something that was uniquely his. And he did an immense amount of research on both lineups and transactions. Did you know that Giants pitcher Tarzan Parmalee was out with appendicitis at the beginning of the season? Or that Cubs shortstop Billy Jurgis missed over a month also due to appendicitis? Or how about Frank Pierce, the Phillies pitcher, who held out for a better contract more than a week into the season? There was also Wes Ferrell, the Cleveland pitcher, who held out until the Indians traded him to the Red Sox. Senators catcher Cliff Bolton held out until late July. And then there was 40-year-old Alex McColl in his second season in the majors. McColl appeared in a whopping 42 games despite not coming up to the club until mid-May. McColl's story really could be a video of its own. I mean, he started pitching in 1915, pitched through 1941. He got 332 wins in the minor leagues, 263 losses, and over 5,000 innings pitched. He also ended up managing the Washington Senators after his Major League cup of coffee. He passed away in Ohio in February 1991. He was 96 years old. You see, a season replay can be just a bunch of games if you let it. However, if you work on it a bit, it can open the door to an entire world that you never knew existed. It's a world of guys like the 17-year-old Phil Cavarretta, who managed to get into a handful of games at first base for the Cubs at the very end of 1934. Cavarretta, of course, became their full-time first baseman in 1935. And Cavarretta actually is a special part of this story. You see, Bob Levy was born in November 1934, only a few months after the teenage Cavarretta made his first Major League appearance. Cavarretta was Levy's favorite player growing up, ever since Levy attended his first ball game at Wrigley Field. But Phil wasn't one for autographs, which frustrated the young Levy. Eddie Stanky, however, was another story, and Bob apparently collected his autograph a number of times. Levy reminds us that Leo DeRocher once said of Stanky, he can't run, he can't field, he can't hit, all he can do is beat you. And on it goes, one baseball yarn after another. The Gas House Gang, the famous 1934 Cardinals, didn't win the pennant in this replay. It was the Giants who won it, led by the famous Carl Hubbell. Hubbell, the man who famously struck out 5 American League star hitters in succession in the All-Star game in real life that year, Hubbell won 32 games for the Giants in this replay. He also won 2 World Series games, leading the Giants to a 5-game win over the Detroit Tigers. I guess that means that Brooklyn wasn't in the league after all. Now, as you may recall, 1934 was the year Bill Terry famously mocked the Dodgers, asking if they were still in the league. In real life, the Dodgers got their revenge, beating the Giants in the final 2 games of the season to give the pennant to the Gashouse Gang. Now, admittedly, it's kind of hard to recreate that sort of thing in a baseball tabletop game, but it sure is a lot of fun to read about it. The Tigers, meanwhile, breezed through the American League in this replay, overcoming the Yankees by 8 games. And Jimmy Fox had 59 home runs. Normally, that would be at the top of the highlight list. Bob, however, writes that he felt odd about Fox hitting so many. Jimmy only had 44 in the real-life 1934 season. Well, so much for the replay. Now, let's get back to that talk about immortality. No, we're not here for a religious or philosophic discussion. Instead, I want to talk about Levy's research style. Bob did extensive research in the old newspapers, creating diagrams of lineups and substitutes to try to pin down exact transactions. Bob did this for a number of seasons, actually. Some of his work is still floating around out there in one collection or another. But this is the most impressive work I think that Bob Levy ever did. This is a book that was written all about the transactions of the 1946 baseball season. That's right, Bob Levy wrote an entire book just about the transactions in 1946, which was, of course, the first post-war season. And it's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, you really need to. Now, this isn't a statistics book. This isn't also really a reference book. This is a storybook. It's a storybook that doubles as a reference book. I'd consider it on par with the glory of their times, and the research inside it is just absolutely impeccable. If you're a baseball fan, you really need to read this. Bob's research has helped preserve the stories of the past. Now, isn't that a form of immortality? The stories of men, famous and obscure, that have been preserved over the ages. Stories that are told and retold, and then are changed as we play our favorite games. Bob Levy passed away in 2008. He was only 74 years old. But Bob's work and Bob's memory lives on. Now, if I'm talking about Bob 16 years after his passing, well, if that's not immortality, then what is?